Hi, my name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED. It's Monday night, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, and I'm here again with the contest crew. A few days ago, I released a video interview with Kyle Krieg AA0Z Zulu. In that interview, Kyle made his case on why contests needed to change. That video interview has gotten a lot of attention online and created a lot of dialogue, and I thought it best to bring some of those questions and comments here to the contest crew so they could answer them. And I'm going to start off tonight with Randy, K5ZD.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I think one of the things we have to start with before we start talking about changing contesting is decide what it's about. What is a contest? Why do they exist? And a contest is a game. A game has rules. The rules essentially define the playing field or a structure. You could think of them as constraints. And the goal is to, and they define the scoring. So the goal is to figure out, okay, given these constraints, whether it's by mode or band or time or whatever, how do I maximize my score? And so that's fine. The next thing is contests generally are about doing things on the radio. So the whole idea is to use RF to communicate from one place to another, and that's how you build your score. And, in the early days, contesting, we didn't have all this connectivity. We didn't know what was going on. As a contest operator, to achieve success, you were a DXer during the week or something. You kind of knew what the bands were going to do. You knew certain missionaries showed up at certain places. You know that KV4AA showed up on a certain frequency on 20 meters every day. So you learned all these things. And the game was very much about hunting. You used your skills to go out into the RF wilderness and find people to talk to. And you often didn't have great equipment or great antennas, so you became very good at riding the wave of propagation, knowing gray line, knowing which bands were open when the long path happened, all this kind of stuff. So there's a whole lot of skills about being a DXer. And of course, humans being humans, we're competitive. And so somebody said, well, I'm a better DXer than you are. And we end up with contests, whether it's DX contests or sweepstakes or whatever. And what's happened as we've added all this connectivity to our stations, we ended up with the packet cluster and RBN and spotting, and then we have more internet, so now we can do more things with it. And so some of the conversations are about, well, how can we use all these other things, which actually don't have anything to do with the RF going over the air, and bring them in to change the game? And so it's not so much that people are resistant to change. It's just you have to define which game you're trying to create in order to, define the rules or why the rule changes need to happen and that kind of thing. So what's happened now with all this connectivity and all the spotting is that we've really turned the game from hunting, where you go out into the wilderness and you find your own station to work, to now it's more of a game of shooting. I know a lot of people that they don't operate by touching the radio anymore. They don't tune the knob and listen. They just click the keyboard on their logging software that takes them to the next spot that they haven't worked yet. And they call it. And if they get through, great. They click the button and they go to the next one. And that's fine. I have no problem with that. You work a lot of stations, you work a lot of DX, or you make points. No problem. But it's you have to ask yourself, are you building the same kind of radio skills as the old days when the game first started, where the thing was learn how to tune the bands, learn how to deal with pileups and that kind of thing. So I just wanted to start with that kind of preamble to help remind us what the foundation of contesting is and why these new ideas might be counter to that in some ways. Not that they're bad, they're just different. And that always causes some tension.
Well, first of all, Randy, that's a great place to start, because what you're actually talking about is the fact that contesting has in fact changed. And we're going to get more into that later on. But we're dealing with this overall question, do contests need to change? And you're saying in your time, contesting that has changed dramatically. But before we get any deeper, I think it's important that the three of you tell everybody what your own contesting experience is. And I think that they probably know, given watching 3830 scores in this show. But also, I know at least two of you have managed contests. So you are the they, quote unquote, they that some people are talking about. And Randy, again, I'll start with you because I know you've got a lot of experience actually planning and managing contests. What is that exactly?
Well, yes, where we started. I fell in love with contesting as a 13-year-old. Like the second week I had a license and field day happened. And it was like, wow, I can talk to more people all over the country in a short period of time. I'm hooked. Here I am 50 years later, still doing the same thing. As far as managing contests goes, I managed the CQWPX contest from 2008 to actually, what years was it? 2000, somewhere in that 2005, 2010 range. And then I managed the CQ Worldwide contest for the next 5 years after that. And those are the two of the biggest contests on the calendar. A lot of entries, more than 7,000 or 8,000 entries for each one. And also contests that are very active in terms of not only calculating all the scores and kind of setting the standard for how things are done, but also in terms of enforcing the rules. So having to disqualify people if they don't follow the rules and that kind of thing, which is one of the hardest things you can do as a contest director. So with all that experience, I also have a lot of experience in having people come to me with ideas about rule changes or complaints about rules that there are and that kind of thing. And it's not that some ideas are better than others, but in the end, it's not because we don't want to change anything. Although if you think about it, anytime you suggest a rule change, immediately what comes up is everybody goes, oh, what about the records? And usually it's from people who have records because they spend a lot of time and energy and effort to set a record. And they're like, oh, wait, you're going to make this record all go away or it won't be the same or whatever. So there's always, for every new idea, there's a group of stakeholders who are against it for whatever reason.
Maybe not quite as many years as Randy, but I started seriously contesting when I was 14. So, almost 30 years, not quite. So, I get around the world. I've done a lot of stuff from lots of places, and I managed the NAQP CW contest for 10 years. Not quite as high profile as CQ, but we had a lot of, suggestions on new things and tons of activity. And the biggest thing that happened when I was there is we added the assisted category. And someone asked me, they said, well, is NAQP broken? Well, no, it's not broken. But man, I'm getting clobbered with guys that want to go assisted and they're entering this other category that doesn't make any sense. So we made the assisted category and I got a whole bunch of hate mail for about a month. And then all of a sudden, everybody forgot about that and they're making tons of QSOs and NAQP. So I think the difference is we need to look at it as change, but maybe enhancing what we currently have. And I think that's a difference that we have to look at with these rule changes. Does it enhance it? Yes or no, and then go from there.
Yeah, so I've not managed any contests, but I've certainly been in the game for a long time. Like Chris, a little bit over 30 years of serious contesting. So I am definitely understand where a lot of these older guys come from, even though we're a little bit younger. But there is that part of you that doesn't want to change like the main contests that are out there. Now, one of the things that me and the teams that I've been on is like we like to push the envelope a lot. We've had in several contests, we've actually done a few things where we're 100% within the rules, but the things that we've done have actually made the rules change. One example of that is field day. Me and John, K6AM, we were operating as a one alpha station and fully within the rules, but we had actually two stations going. We were fully interlocked. And it was, people might term it like an octopus situation where we were always transmitting at one time, even though we were one alpha station. And, was that one of the rules that were allowed at the time? It was, but then people understood what we were doing, and now there's a rule against that. So you can't do that anymore. But then there's other times, too, where in different contests where we also kind of push the envelope based on what the rules allow. Even this, 2B SIQ stuff, fully been allowed for a long time. I'm certainly not the one that created it. It's been going on much longer than I've been doing it. The only difference is, I started doing it at a high rate of speed. And now 2B SIQ is extremely commonplace. Most people are doing it. And it's just kind of like pushing the envelope a little bit. So I certainly understand not wanting things to stay the same, and I understand, trying to change things up is difficult, and sometimes that's not really received very well. But I'm all for it.
So the place I wanted to start, and it seems like we've already jumped in, was do contests in fact need to change? And what I'm hearing from all three of you is they have in fact changed quite a bit during the past couple decades at least. Are there other examples of where contests have changed that you haven't yet mentioned?
One of the things, before I answer that question, one of the things you have to realize is a contest, it means many different things to different people. So in the WPX contest last weekend, or 2 weeks ago, there were probably 25,000 call signs active on the air in that weekend. We received logs from a little more than 8,000 of them. So that means there's, 12 to 15,000 people or more who weren't in the contest, but they made contacts. And they may have all been doing it for a different reason. Some people are chasing awards. Some people just like to work people. Some people don't care about paperwork and aren't really, trying to win anything. Some people are testing new equipment. Some guys like to just run their pile-up smasher amplifier and work people far away. There's any number of reasons people operate. And as a contest manager, you have to kind of think that you're running this big party where I want as many people on the air as possible, having as much fun as possible. But at the same time, I need the rules and I need to be aware of this group of people who are trying to be competitive. And so you end up with a very funny dynamic. It's like we've got this contest where there are people who have big scores and are serious and travel and spend money and all this kind of thing, all the way down to guys who just got on the air for 15 minutes, worked a few people, and went away. So it's all over the place. Now, as far as how contests have changed, we've already talked about spotting has definitely made a big difference. In terms of streaming, there's actually no rules that prohibit streaming in the CQ contests. I did it for my CW efforts several years, 10 years ago. I didn't have video, I just had audio, but people could tune in and listen to the contest anytime they wanted. So that's not even a new thing. One of the things that I ran a survey when I was the director of the CQ contest and was getting opinions from people about, well, how should the scoring change? How should the categories change? This kind of thing. And it was very interesting, some of the responses that came back. And one of the things that was created was the classic category. The classic overlay is a category that's for someone who has one radio and operates 24 hours. And the genesis of this rule was from these surveys where I could see over and over again that there were many people responding who would say some variation of, I really like to compete, but I just can't spend the time, or I don't have the physical ability to stay in the chair that long, or whatever. And so what you could see was there's a class of people out there who would like to have a shorter time frame, but they still want to have that constraint so they can compare themselves with other people. The WPX contest had a tri-bander and wires overlay that was added, I think just before I came on board, where the idea was, okay, we're going to group only people together who only have a tri-bander and wire antennas on the low bands. So a lot of people really like that because it feels like it separates them from the superstation. Just not too long ago, one of the things I was very proud of was creating the rookie category. So this is a category for people who were licensed for 3 years or less. And it's very interesting to watch these, I don't want to call them newbies, but these new hams. They find contesting and you see the first year they make a score, the second year they make a higher score, and then the third year they really push to try to make the biggest score that they can because before they expire from being a rookie. And then another category that's similar but different is the youth category, and this is a category for people under 25 years old. So you could be 73 years old and be a rookie because you haven't been licensed that long, but the youth category is definitely based on your age. And so again, it's fun to see these people who often don't have as much station, work their way through and graduate to where maybe they guest stop at a bigger station to have a bigger score. So there are lots of ways, once the concept of overlay categories was created, a lot of things become possible because we have the traditional score, classic rules and everything. And then we say, okay, now we're going to recalculate your score according to the overlay. Well, the only one that's really different is the classic because you're limited to the first 24 hours of operation. but there's nothing that says we couldn't create more categories. And I'll finish up with one other thing. Often people want to suggest, well, I want to do some kind of another rule change that happened during the pandemic was this idea of distributed contesting. The idea that you could use one call sign from multiple stations and put together this distributed entry, which hasn't generated huge numbers of entrants. But one of the things we look at is what kind of innovations are these guys trying? Some of the Russians will do this in UA9 and they'll have different stations in different parts so they can work, and they'll move around which station is active at some point in the contest to try to maximize what their score is. So there's plenty of room for experimentation there. But where I was going was, if you wanted to make your own category, get 10 of your friends together, decide what your rules are going to be, and operate the contest. And you have a choice. You can either have people send the logs into the real contest and send them to you, or you can just have them send them to you, whatever. The contest is all about activity. We want the activity. If you decide to run your own sample experimental contest in the middle of it, if you can use the results that we officially generate, awesome. If you don't want to make your own, that's okay too. But there's no reason people can't try stuff inside one of any contest. They just have to advertise it and then see who responds.
One of the premises that I read often in the online dialogue was this idea that contest organizers are resistant to change. And actually listening to you, Randy, that seems the total opposite. It seems as though you were fielding questions, paying attention to what was going on in the marketplace, and responding where it made sense. But tell me more about that. Where does this idea come from that contest organizers are resistant to change?
One of the things is different contests have different administration governance, let's call it. In the CQ contest, one of the things that's fun about working on those is you have a small committee of dedicated contesters who kind of can act as a sounding board for new ideas and help vet things, and also give us kind of a global perspective, because their CQ committee has people from all around the world. So we can get in one shot, what do the Japanese think? What do the Germans think? What do the Italians think? What do the Russians think? That kind of thing. Then you have the ARL contest, which have a contest advisory committee. And the CAC has one member from each ARL district or division, And that group is truly an advisory committee. They can debate and talk about and discuss amongst themselves, and hopefully they talk to members in their divisions. But in the end, they make a vote and they make a recommendation to headquarters. And ARL headquarters can decide to accept that recommendation or not, or actually change it. This is the frustrating part for me, was the CAC will go through all this deliberation, recommend a rule, and the headquarters will go, yeah, okay, we don't really like it that way. We're going to do something different. And so it's much more difficult to get new rule innovations into ARL unless there's some kind of stressor. So, for example, ARL recently added a rule that allows you to self-spot. So you can spot yourself. All the other contests typically said that was not allowed. And this was a result of somebody doing video streaming. And it was possible in the video stream to see what frequency they were on. And it happened to be a pretty high visibility streamer, which is fine. It was all good for the hobby. But there was a complaint like, oh, well, this guy's essentially self-spotting because people can see his frequency and they like him and they want to call him. And so he had some kind of unfair advantage. I'm not sure if that was really true or not, but it started a squabble. And in the end, the ARL said, you know what? We can't really solve this problem the right, I shouldn't say the right way. We can't really figure out a good solution to this problem. We'll just allow everything. That way we don't have to worry about it anymore. So in pretty quick order, they decided, oh, we're going to allow self-spotting. And so now we have a great deal of confusion because many contests don't allow it and the ARL contests do. So this is part of the problem when different contest sponsors move in different directions. There's often confusion over what the actual rules are for a given event because not everybody sits down and studies the rules before they start.
So it sounds like whenever somebody thinks about an organizer being resistant to change, you really need to think about who the sponsor is, whether it be an ARRL contest or a CQ contest or your local state QSO party. You're dealing with different structures, different volunteer groups. Maybe there's one decision maker, maybe there's a committee, but it's not one size fits all.
They're all different. I make recommendations to the New England QSO party director every year and he ignores me. It's okay. But that's sometimes how it works.
Which leads me to another question. Who does get a say in the future of contesting?
It's all about reputation, right? So the guys with good reputations typically have more pull. Those guys hopefully would volunteer for stuff and want to, enact change. And that's kind of how these things work. They're volunteer positions, except for the ARRL, although the CAC is volunteer. So the guys that are going to guide contesting are the guys that are going to suggest it and then actually act on it. So, as we say at work, talk is cheap, and change just for change's sake doesn't really lead to a path of success unless you have a problem that needs solving. And if the problem that needs to be solved is to get more guys in the contesting, all right, we can go from there. But I'm really big on giving back to the hobby, and that's why I volunteered for the NAQP thing. I'm sure that's why Randy does stuff. So those are the guys that are going to change contesting, those that are willing to put in the extra time.
Yeah, I think it is a communal sport. So everybody can vote by getting on the air or not getting on the air, by sending in a log or not sending in a log. Obviously, the more active you are and the better your score is, probably a little bit more visibility that you have. There's not a voting process per se, but there is a feeling like people who are invested in the contest may carry a little bit more weight in terms of their opinion. In the end, a contest live and die on whether people participate or not. So if nobody shows up for your event, then something is wrong. Either people are saying we're not interested in it, or it's, whatever reason. And then you have to think, well, should I keep doing it or should I change something? That kind of thing. Like I said, the bigger events are a little harder because you have a lot more players.
I think one of the things that we really need to focus on here, Randy already mentioned it, and that's potentially doing a contest within a contest. One thing that I didn't really like was when WPX removed the unassisted category from the contest. And so me and Axel, KI6RRN, we created our own set of awards. And for 2 years, we ran the unassisted challenge. And what we ended up doing was we had people that were interested in still doing WPX as unassisted. They would send us the logs. We would have, WPX sponsors actually adjudicate the logs, and we'll get the final scores from them. But we had our own set of plaques. We sent out 15 to 20 plaques for each mode of the contest. We did that for a couple of years. It was very successful. It was time consuming. We've stopped doing it. Wish we had the time to continue with it. But stuff like that's definitely possible. And I think that the other thing too that you have to remember is it's not super important for everybody to have the opportunity to actually win the contest. I'm going to give you myself as an example. I just did WPX sideband from ND7K, as we know. I put in a very large effort from there, and I knew before I even started the contest that I wasn't going to win, and I was okay with that. And I came in fourth place overall in the country. I'm extremely happy with that from the West Coast. But there's no need to change the contest rules to make sure that I can win. I had the most contacts. I had as many multipliers as the other leading scorers, but they had more points per queue, and that's just the reality of things. So I'm super fortunate to have a very large station to operate from, but even that doesn't guarantee you even the opportunity to win. Like, it wasn't even there. It wasn't an opportunity this time. And that's okay. It's just important to realize that you can judge yourself against your peers versus the top scorers if that's really what the reality is where you live. And that shouldn't be an issue either.
I do like this idea of a contest within a contest, and I would think, and I don't have your experience, so one of you could answer this, but I would think if you create a contest within a contest and create a groundswell of activity, then that probably would get more attention from the contest organizer, would it not?
Yeah, I think so, depending on how compatible it was with the event.
So let's move on to a more specific comment that has come up a lot in this ongoing dialogue, and that is this idea that contests should be shorter. There seems to be a return to that all the time, that it's not healthy to be operating 48 hours or even 36 hours. What would you say to that?
Sounds like a cop-out.
Yeah, no. I think we would all agree that 48 hours is a long time to stay awake.
But every contest doesn't have to be the same. I think that's a very important thing, is we don't want everything to be the same. And it seems like a lot of guys that want to change things want it to be more like the contest they like. Okay, fine. Well, variety is what we need. Shorter contests. Okay, we have sprints twice a year. Would be cool if we had more of them. The CWTs are every week. They're only an hour. There's a Thursday night sprint. There's medium speed contests. There's all kinds of stuff. WPX 36 hours, classic category. I mean, there's a lot of shorter. NEQP, I forgot NEQP. That's the best one. But I like the idea of, hey, I'm going to get on for 4 hours and let's see who else I can compete against in that 4 hours. I think that's super cool. I think if there was like a website to facilitate that, say, hey, I'm going to get on from 18 to 22 Zulu on Saturday. Who else is in to see what we can do? I think that's super cool. But it would take someone to have a website, the wherewithal and all that. Shorter contests are great, but I think the contest within a contest is the way to go, because you need a time frame that's, a 48-hour time frame is great. You don't operate the whole 48 hours. You can have a subset. Obviously is successful. Look at the classic category. It's great.
If you look at QSO parties, their times are all over the place. There are ones that are 1 day long and 10 hours or 12 hours. There are ones that have, 9 hours operating on Saturday and another 10 hours on Sunday, because they're a little more contained. The goal is to work a specific area of the country so they can kind of tailor the hours to the demographics, let's call it. When you start looking at DX contests, though, you kind of have to work in terms of in quantities of 24 hours at a time, because otherwise some part of the world gets less daylight or less darkness or less propagation on certain bands, that kind of thing. And so that's why DX contests are 48 hours. The other thing you start to realize as the contest director, and I think this is in the CQ worldwide write-up that's being worked on right now, there's very few people who operate 45 hours. It's a small number, less than a dozen. But there's 8,000 guys who operated some other amount of time, and the average is generally around 12. The reason contests are 2 days long is because not everybody is available on the one day. So, I can't make Saturday because I have to go to my in-laws' house or whatever. So I'll operate on Sunday, or I operate Saturday and then I have other stuff I need to do on Sunday, or I can't operate at night, or my kids have a ball game or whatever. Again, back to we're about having fun. So for a major DX contest, we want 48 hours because we want to give everybody in the world their shot. Oftentimes when I do a part-time contest and a DX contest, I try to operate some amount of every part of the day, but I may do it across 2 days. Like I'll operate them wee hours one day and sleep in the other, that kind of thing. So just having more time gives people who are more casual a chance to also participate. But it does make it hard on the guys that are trying to win, because they are pushing each other to maximize their score, and that often means trying to maximize the time you're awake.
Yeah, so I think for me, obviously doing 48 hours, is it healthy? I'm not going to tell anybody that it's healthy, because it's probably not. And like Randy said, the number of people that are actually doing it is extremely small. I think that it's important to have the ability to do it if you want to. But again, that's only for like if you're really chasing like the top scores in the world. And when I'm, taking my time to go down to a place like the Cayman Islands, when I'm operating from ZF1A for a DX contest, if I'm going to take a week out of my time away from my family, for me personally, it's worth my time to actually do the entire contest. I don't want to, be limited to, let's say, 24 hours out of the 48. I don't want to, I'm there to operate radio. And I know there's other people that are like me that, they do these operations for the contest specifically. I'm not there to go to the beach and have a good time with, swimming in the ocean kind of a thing. I'm there for the contest. And, for me, I have the ability. Yes, I'm a little bit younger as far as, compared to other hams. And I can do 48 hours, not easily, but I can do it. And I like to have the opportunity to do that if I'm going to spend all this money and exert all this time and effort at a station like that. Now, if I'm operating from my house here, there's no way I'm ever going to do 48 hours. That's just crazy talk, There's no need for it because it's just not going to be fun. You're going to run out of people to work. It just doesn't make sense. And it's okay, like Randy's been saying, operate less time, totally fine. And you don't have to put in 48 hours to enjoy the contest. You need to do whatever is best for you and best for your family. And that varies from person to person. It's different for everybody. But like I said, there's not a lot of guys doing full 48. But it's okay that it's there as an option. 'Cause if you really want to compete, that's what you got to do.
If you look at any of the CQ Worldwide or WPX results, there's a column for hours, operating hours. And it's there specifically so you can look and see who else operated about the same amount you did. Or you can see a guy who beat you. You can say, well, maybe I would have I operated half as much time as he did. So therefore you can tell yourself you're better, whatever. But the great thing about online contest results, as opposed to being in the magazine, is we can have as many columns as we need. We just have to decide there's data that we want to collect and get people to put it in their log. While we're talking about contest changes, I thought of one that not all contest changes are beneficial. One of the challenges I had during my WPX director period was I had a number of DXpeditions that were pushing on me because the single op rule was 30 hours. And they're like, we're going somewhere. We want to, we've traveled someplace. We don't want to sit around and just take a nap for almost half the contest. We want to operate more. And I thought, well, okay, you beat me down. I'll move it from 30 to 36. And what happened was at 30 hours, just about any place in the world had the potential to win because there were enough big hours in 30 hours and enough access to multipliers in the different regions of the country. And if you manage your off times correctly and so on, you could win from New Zealand just as well as you could win from Europe or North America, whatever. By going to 36 hours, what happened was almost all of those extra 6 hours played into the hands of people who are at the same place that wins the worldwide. North Africa and North South America, took away all these guys that were far away from the population centers from having a chance. And I did not fully appreciate that when I made the change. But once you make a change like that, it's very hard to retract it because now you're going to say, okay, well, I've got 8 years or 10 years now, actually 12 years now, where the rules allowed 36, and now we're going to go back to 30, and then you get the whole conversation about records and comparing scores from one of the... So you have to be really careful. Just because something sounds like a good idea doesn't always mean that it is. And even the definition of the assisted category that we have today came into being because people were worried about, now they have the cluster. The rule they made was, well, you can't use the cluster to find call signs or frequencies. But if you think about it, a better definition would have been said connected and disconnected. A connected station is one that uses anything from outside the box that is the station. But at the time that clusters first showed up, we were on 2 meters. Using packet. We weren't using the internet. So, it's like anything, the rules maybe don't always catch up with the technology, but I'm not sure that, we always have to evaluate back to the beginning of this conversation. What's the game we're trying to play? What are we trying to promote? Operating skills, activity in an area, whatever. And then what rules do we need to help make that fun for people?
Well, it certainly underscores the idea that when you make a change, there's potential unintended consequences or consequences that you don't realize maybe for a couple of years. And then they become certainly obvious to you as technology changes or people start to understand how to game the system. I want to move into making a contest fair because I know that's another theme that came up quite a bit in the online dialogue. And 2 things come to mind. First of all, it seems as though we've already talked about ways of trying to, if not make it fair, at least to categorize various operators in different groupings. But it also recalls a conversation, Randy, that you've made several times in the past, that ham radio contesting just is not fair. If you're a W1, that's different than being a W4. So tackle that whole fairness category for us, if you would.
I think this is the Gordian knot of contesting in that, yes, contests are not fair. The stations aren't the same. The geographies aren't the same. The demographics of when propagation matches up with when people are on the air is not the same from one part of the world to another. So we kind of fool ourselves when we create scores and stack rank them. We generate a certain amount of bragging rights, but people who have been in the game for a while start to understand how to evaluate scores. Like a big score from one part of the world may not really be as great as a lesser one that's from somewhere else. And so you kind of sometimes have to look through it with a knowledgeable eye to say, hey, this isn't a score that we should really respect because it was done from a less advantaged area or from a less advantaged station. What you generally find, though, in the end is the good ops are going to do well no matter what. So it kind of works out in the end, but yeah, they're inherently, we can never call them fair. Even a WRTC is the closest attempt we have to fair, where we take 45 guys and give them similar tri-banders on 100 watts in a similar geographic region. And even there, you see a wide disparity in scores. Some of it operator, some of it bad luck, some of it's just even the subtlest things about a location. And you're back to, even in a place where we try to perfectly balance for fairness, there's always something.
Randy hit all the points, but another thing that needs to be fair is the log checking. And I don't mean to go totally off topic, but there's always this, I don't even know how to put it, but everybody wants instant gratification, right? I'm totally guilty of it. So the online scoreboard's great. You can see where you are against your peers. You can see how you're doing in real time. And then, okay, great, the contest is over. It's like, oh, I totally won. Well, I didn't officially win because the results aren't out yet. Okay, so the results are going to be out in X amount of months, let's say in years past. Well, the WPX just came out with the raw scores in 7 days. That's awesome, pre-log checking. Okay, so let's say I'm really, really close to beating Dan, and it's going to come down to log check. As a competitor, I want to make sure that's accurate. If the real-time log scoring and log checking is not going to be accurate, I think we need to give it time. I think the process that the CQ guys go through to catch cheaters and make sure that things are fair is super important. And if it takes a little longer, that's okay. If we know that we've outright beat our competitor ahead of time, okay, perfect. And then we can get the records and the score cemented eventually. But being fair is a lot of things. And for me, getting log checking right is super important. If that wasn't accurate and I knew that the guys ahead of me were cheating like crazy, I probably would not enter the contest.
Let's continue on that theme of instantaneous scoring and results. I don't know that I understand the judging process. Could one of you help me with that? Like, what happens with the check logs, and how do you, including with the WRTC, how does that process work? So the WRTC is probably the fastest moving of the process, right? You're awarding people before they go home. What does that look like?
It also may be the one that suffers the most because of speed, right? So let's just talk about, for a big contest, the logs all come pouring in. You upload them in a web page. They all get stored into a repository, and then we fire up the computer, and it goes through every log. And computers are great at this. They will go QSO by QSO and go, "Hey, is this QSO in the other log?" That's kind of the rough first cut. But then you go, "Well, I can't find it. So let's see if we can find a call sign that's 1 letter off, or 2 letters off, or logged on the wrong band, or the wrong mode, or whatever." There's an umpteen number of things. So what you start to realize is a classic database and computing problem: garbage in, garbage out. So part of the process for the log checkers is to go through and try to clean up some of the garbage in. Believe it or not, people really do log QSOs at the wrong time. They log them on the wrong band. They leave out part of their log. There's a lot of stuff. And so getting even the raw scores in a week seems like, wow, what takes so long? Well, what takes so long is we've got to do the first pass through and make sure that we have less garbage in, so we get something. And then as you go from there, you start just doing cleanup. There are some calls that are so mangled, the computer can't figure it out, who the match is. So we try to minimize the amount of human interaction. We'd like the computer to do the whole thing, because that way everybody's judged exactly the same way. But sometimes there's even still stuff that you look at and you go, okay, I see how this guy mangled this call, so I have a way that I can bust it so it hurt, he gets the penalty as he deserves. But it's mostly the computer doing the work, and then people just managing, monitoring the reports and making sure that we end up with the right order of finish. That's the most important thing. When you see contest scores, you should think order of finish, not one guy being 10 points or 100 points ahead of another. Now, to answer Chris, to talk back to what Chris was saying, there are guys who have 2% or 1% error rate. That's phenomenal. And there's guys who have 10% error rate. So at the end of the contest, when we do the raw scores, if we said, hey, raw scores, we're all done, the guy who has a 10% error rate has 10% more score than he deserves, or probably even more, bigger score reduction. So the idea of log checking being so important is because that's how we really filter out the mistakes that are made. So, it's not all about quantity and speed. It's also about quality and accuracy. And that's what log checking does for you. And then in the CQ contest, there's a group of people who go one step further. They start looking at extraordinary things that they find in the logs and try to figure out, is this extraordinary thing for real? Or is it something not, that might not be following the rules? And that's where the on-the-air recordings come in, because now we can actually go back and hear what was really going on versus what we see in the log, that kind of thing. Most contests don't do that. They just focus on the log checking part, but both are important for a high prestige contest.
And I presume the people doing the check logs are highly paid professionals that the organization has hired for a week.
No, they would be people who do this because they love the contest or want to help the game. I probably spent 400 hours a year for free, just essentially working in the engine room on this garbage in, garbage out problem. So, and then there are other people who work on the software and the websites. And then once we've done all this engine room work, there's some poor director who still has to go through and write to people and say, hey, we think you broke the rules. Are you sure you entered the right category? Are you sure you did this right or that right? And then do a write-up at the end. So it's a lot of work up and down the line.
Well, and I guess that's my point, that, obviously I was being facetious, but I think sometimes we forget that all these things are run by volunteer hours, and a tremendous amount of volunteer hours. So we're not looking at a corporation that's hiding the bucket of cash and not doing the job well. Typically,
and there's no entry fees in these contests either. So you get what you paid for in some way.
Exactly. Dan, you were going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say that's rather unfortunate, but there actually has been some cheating going on in the upper echelons of contesting in the major contests. And with all the work that guys like Randy and others do, they have been able to catch some of the guys that have been doing some of the nefarious things that happen during contests. So I think it's a really important role that they play because, when we're, me and Chris and the majority of the contesters out there are putting in big scores, we're hoping that our competitors are being truthful and not cheating, but it really does happen. And I'm no expert on log checking. I don't do it, but I'm just going to throw one other thing out there too, especially when it comes to like WRTC and the log checking there. Randy, one thing that he said was that it probably suffers the most in terms of being forced to be released so quickly. And one of the things that ends up happening at WRTC with the log checking is that they spend a lot of time looking at, let's say, the top 10 logs, just to make sure that the order of finish is right. Especially in a contest like that, it makes a lot of sense to spend more time on those logs versus the logs further down the list. And that's a fact of the amount of time that they have to actually look at these things. It would be nice to look at all 50 logs with a fine-tooth comb, make sure everybody gets the right number of points. And to an extent, they do that, but the top 5 to 10 logs are the ones that really get looked at really closely, because we want to make sure that the order of finish is correct when it comes to something like that.
So I'm cognizant of the time, so I'm probably going to skip a couple of the questions or comments and jump to a couple just to close. And we started off with this idea, do contests need to change? And I think that we all agreed that they have already changed and they will continue to change. But another idea that's been floating around is, do contests need to grow? And Randy, you sort of touched upon this early on, but what would you say to that? Do contests need to grow in activity?
Well, yeah, the more the merrier, right? The more people we have to work, the more QSOs and multipliers we'll make, and generally that makes it more fun. If we suddenly had 100,000 people on the air in these contests, the bands would be really crowded. I operated in Japan. I lived in Japan for a while, and I operated some of their domestic contests, and talk about a bunch of people stacked in on a very small amount of space. That's it. But again, that's what contesting is about, right? Being able to deal with the QRM and being motivated to build a station or to go to a place where you have a little bit of an advantage or signal strength improvement and compete with what the conditions are. So yeah, I would love to see more people. I'm a little nervous because in the end, ham radio is a certain size. Contesting is going to collect a certain percentage of whatever the size is. So the more hams there are, the more likely we are to have more contests.
Like you said, the more the merrier. But I think contesting is a cool avenue, maybe a gateway drug into other things. Uh, Once you get better at it and you want to have bigger scores, you can innovate, you can do other things, and that's a kind of a tenet that ham radio has across all aspects, actually. Um, and then maybe it motivates a guy like you, Kevin. Hey, I want to go to the Caribbean and work, guys. That's super cool. Well, now all the contesters get to work you in all these rare places, and hey, they got another molt, and then maybe you have more fun, and then it kind of snowballs from there. And then the friendships you make are, as we said before, the coolest things ever. Like today, I'm in Texas with some great friends, and all because of contesting. So it's not just the contest itself in my eyes, it's the whole community around it, and growing that helps and adds in ways that you didn't even think of when you started hitting F1 at someone's station.
Yeah, I think contesting participation kind of ebbs and flows with how good propagation is. Right now, we're at a great time because anybody can get on 10 meters and work a bunch of guys. When we get down towards the bottom of the cycle, it's always going to happen where the number of participants goes down, and that's just because it's harder to make cues. It's not quite as fun, but even then, there's still a lot of participation now as it is. Is there room to grow? Absolutely, and we should be thinking of ways to increase participation, especially from the younger group of operators. And I think there are some valid points that Kyle did bring up that might help with some of that in regards to that. How we implement that's a little bit harder to figure out. But I think there are certain avenues that we can take. Like I think the live streaming thing is kind of an interesting one. I'm not sure how that really increases participation on the radio, but maybe that's something that us older guys on this call don't really quite have a good grasp of. But I can certainly see some value in that. I know that Kyle did some live streaming this past weekend in the Missouri QSO party. I took a quick look at that. It was interesting to see. So I can see where those ideas come from, and maybe that's something that we need to look at to move forward to try and bring in some more of the younger operators. But I think just in general, I think there's still a lot of guys coming into the hobby that are new, that are still picking up contesting as it is.
And some things just take time to evolve. So one of the things I often hear people say is, well, we should upload all the QSOs as they happen in real time to a central server and do all the checking in real time. And when the contest is over, you know the result. Well, it turns out this is technically possible. It's been done. A year ago, well, there's a platform made by some guys in Italy called Ham Award, hamaward.org. And every WRTC competitor in Italy had a small bit of software as part on their logging computer, and it was sending every QSO to the Ham Award server. And what this meant was the Ham Award server could present back to all of the chasers, all the hunters that were out in the world. They could see how many WRT stations they had worked, what bands and modes and all this kind of stuff. And so they could kind of have instantaneous access to how they were doing in their quest to find everybody. The WRTC competitors could not see this. We did not have any idea how we were doing compared to everybody else. But the goal was maximize the number of QSOs for WRTC stations. And so in that regard, here's real-time logging to a central server, presenting real-time results to an audience, and it worked flawlessly. We use this same technology for 2 month-long operating events, both in 23 and this year in 24. Where they had a number of stations around the world that they just dedicated, this Marconi birthday thing was this past January. They logged 1.5 billion QSOs in real time from stations around the world, Indonesia, China, North America, Oceania, wherever. 1.5 billion QSOs in 31 days. And it was all visible. You could see if somebody logged you correctly. You could see how many band modes you'd worked, all the stations for getting award points and all this kind of stuff. So we're not that far away. Here's the problem. You got to get people to want to do it. And so even the live scoreboard, as cool as it is, and I was one of the early adopters. I was with VA2WA when he started the contest online scoreboard thing. It's picking up, but it's not like everybody says they want to be on the scoreboard for a variety of reasons. Some people can't do the technology. Some people just don't want to share. Some people just don't want the embarrassment or the reality of knowing how they're doing, whatever. It doesn't matter. But until you start to see online scoreboard usage going up, the chances of a fully online contest where everything's checked in real time will probably be somewhat elusive. And I think when you compare to things like, Wii or PlayStation or gaming or whatever, that's humans against a centralized computer. There's no RF involved. There's no stations that need to be built to do that. So, we have to be careful to really make this into gaming. We would have to take the game off the air. And I'm not sure that's really where we want to go. So we have to find ways where we keep the on the air part, but maybe make the some of the back end score collecting and adjudication happen a little bit faster. So people should not feel like, we're just being ignored. Why aren't they doing this? Simple matter of programming. Well, the fact is all the technology exists, but we're not mentally ready as a community to adopt it widely. So this is a great example where somebody needs to take the lead and say, okay, I'll go first. I'll sponsor this thing. I will I'll promote it. I'll get people to be active. I'll present results. Okay, let's go. See whether people sign up or not.
So, Randy, I want to repeat that back to you because I want to make sure I heard you correctly. Are you suggesting to the people that believe contests need to change dramatically that they just do it? Create one.
Yeah, there's no better way to prove an idea than to go out and promote it and see what happens. I think one of the things they will find is it doesn't happen instantly. You may have to have a 5-year plan to get, the first years will be kind of rough. You'll get a few early adopters, but a lot of people go, it's too much trouble. Why am I doing this? You have to give people a reason to want to participate in your contest. And the big contests kind of have that, especially though worldwide, because everybody loves working DX, or the sweepstakes because it's been around a long time and has a unique format, but not every contest generates a lot of activity.
So guys, once again, I'm blown away, impressed with your insight, your contest experience, but also just your professionalism. You're responding to these questions that don't always get posed in a very positive way online. And tonight, all I've heard really is a positive approach from all three of you, and I really appreciate that more than the insight. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks.